who is prepared to listen to the next congressperson from the Congressional District 6. I'm Eric. I'm your dude for the next 2 hours, I guess. But one thing I want to ask sort of as a personal favor, and for a number of us. A dear friend of the DFL, longtime activist in labor, passed away this week. Casey Kallstrom passed away, for those of you who know her. Longtime activist for Communication Workers of America. Longtime helper for all of us who are trying to do progressive politics in Greater Minnesota. So if you guys would do me a favor, can we take a moment for Casey, please? Thanks for that. For those of you who knew her and would like to remember her, her memorial service or visitation is occurring concurrently. It's happening right now in St. Joe. So a bunch of us are going to go over after we're done here because it goes until 3 o'clock, I think. One other thing that you might be interested in is there's another event today at the library. I believe around 3 o'clock. There's a forum or a discussion. I think Councilmember Ibrahim might be taking part in it. She is not, never mind. But it's a discussion with Nora Hurdle, who's a local journalist, about the challenges that, in particular, East African candidates face in getting elected in Greater Minnesota. So there'll be a public conversation, I believe. Asani's going to participate, a couple of people, just to talk about how race structures some of our elections out here. So that's, I think, starting at 3 o'clock at the library in downtown, if you're interested. We good? All right, let's get started. Thanks. All right, so here's the agenda and the rules. I'm going to read them to you, just so that everyone knows what's going on and to keep these two unruly characters in order. And that's not a debate. We're answering questions. And also you should know that both candidates have had the questions for quite some time to come up with reasoned, thoughtful, well-researched answers. Time limits will be introductions, 2 minutes apiece. Forum questions, 2 minutes apiece. Friends will be passing around 3x5 cards. There's availability for all of you to write down questions that you would like me to ask at the close of our prepared questions. So please do avail yourself of that opportunity. Write some questions down. They'll come up here and we'll go through and figure out how we can talk about and make this a little bit more of a conversation, hopefully, at some point. Then closing remarks will each have 2 minutes. All candidates answer the same questions. And again, as I said, they've had them for a while. Any candidate who attacks their opponent in their response will forfeit their time for that response. I'm not sure exactly what we mean by attack, but my expectations are pretty high, so let's see how that goes. All right, let's get started, folks, if we could. Let's start with introductions, and Doug, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. I'm going to stand up since some of you are over there on house right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Doug Chapin, and I am currently the only declared candidate for the 6th District in Congress here in Minnesota. The 6th District is changing. It's changing in some good ways. It is growing faster than just about any other district in Minnesota. The average growth in Minnesota is about 1%. The 6th has grown by 5%. Our median income is higher than most districts in the state. And we're seeing some good economic news, including the opening of a new plant in Sartell to build non-rare earth metal magnets. But not all the news is good, and some of the change isn't good. We still see closed storefronts and closed businesses on main streets across the district. We're still feeling the loss of manufacturing here in St. Cloud years later. And farmers across the state, including in the 6th District, are seeing the best soybean crop they have had in years, either rotting in the fields or drying in their silos, because this White House has torched the market around the world. I think it's time for a change in our representation. I think it's time for a member of Congress who, unlike Tom Emmer, will show up for you. And I think that means 3 things. I think that means showing up in the community, actually physically being in the community where you can see and interact and listen to people. And I've done that. I have a brand new car that I've put almost 25,000 miles on since I bought it in February. I believe we need to show up in Congress fighting for working families and farmers and parents and kids every day to make sure that we can all not just survive, but thrive and live in an America that we want to. And finally, we want to show up for you in your lives. When you have a problem with the federal government, members of Congress are supposed to help you. And as your member of Congress, when, not if, I get to Congress, we will show up for you every day here in the 6th District. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. Anson, if you would, please.
All right. Check, check. Okay. My name is Anson Amberson, and I want to start by saying thank you for being here today. I appreciate your coming to listen to our thoughts. And thank you, Senator Putnam, for chairing our forum and for the educational and inspirational community engagement events you've been hosting. I found those to be inspirational for myself, and they're part of the reason why I'm exploring my candidacy today. Now, again, my name is Anson Amberson, and yes, I am still in an exploratory phase. I'm wrapping that up as we speak. This week I took some decisive action in that regard, but I still need to finish wrapping up before I can officially declare my candidacy and begin my fundraising. Let's see, I'm running to, I'm seeking the endorsement to run against Tom Emmer because I feel like he's in government to preserve his own position in the party. It seems like he's put his loyalty to the MAGA movement over his loyalty to us, his constituents. And I don't see that he's really hearing us. Doug has certainly outlined some of the points. For myself personally, I've lived in St. Cloud since 2005 to the present with my wife and family. My education, I graduated in the top 10 of my class in high school. I graduated with honors from the University of Wisconsin in Eau Claire, where I studied pre-med general biology. I was also a music minor. I did have a semester abroad in Scotland. I've also studied at several technical colleges. So I really appreciate the technical degrees that are available. But I think our students also deserve liberal arts degrees, because I certainly value my liberal arts degree. I've had over 40 years of service-oriented volunteer and professional experience, starting from my youth until now. And service is why I want to run for office, to serve you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anson. And gentlemen, as you know, the questions will be pivoting around particular themes, and our first theme is veterans. Veteran suicide rates remain alarmingly high, yet funding for mental health services, peer counseling, and transition programs has often been uneven or politicized in Congress. What specific legislative steps would you champion to address the mental health crisis among veterans, and how would you build bipartisan support for real solutions rather than simple symbolic measures? Let's start with Anson.
All right, so regarding veterans, veterans are the reason we moved to the area. My wife Rachel serves, well, she's a music therapist, and she came to be a music therapist here at the VA, and she's done a great job serving veterans there. But every year, we lose thousands of veterans to suicide. The vast majority of them are men, but the women as well. For me, I have a personal connection to this issue. Here in college, my brother had a housemate who was a veteran of the First Gulf War. He was drunk one night, his housemates kept the keys from him, he had a handgun in his room, and he used that to end his life. So along with that, handgun control or sensible legislation can help. Those red flag laws are meant to help prevent that sort of thing. Also, with working in the trauma center here as a patient care extender, seeing people come in after having attempted to take their own lives and trying to save their lives, that's been a very personal experience for me, and it's happened way too often. It's a very common experience in the trauma center. I want to encourage anyone here who may be a veteran struggling with crisis or thoughts of suicide to reach out to people you trust, your medical providers, and the Suicide Crisis Prevention Hotline, 988. Your lives are valuable, and they're worth keeping and saving. So veterans, they're a special breed. They are used to tight connection, cohesion in their units. and they need to maintain that connection once they're out of service. And there are a lot of services available for that through the Veterans Administration. However, things like the Doge disaster have been cutting funding. My own wife's position at the VA was cut due to Doge, and now we have to survive that loss of income and the loss of services for veterans. Also, I think the Quantico speech is setting us up for more disaster, and we need to address, repair those changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Anson. Doug, please.
I'm actually going to set the example to sit down during questions for now. Please stand up at the end. Thank you. I think, first of all, talking about the VA, we have to acknowledge that across the country, but especially in communities like St. Cloud, the VA is not just a mission for our veterans, but it actually is a source of income and livelihood for people here. And I don't think we can talk about the VA without talking about the drastic cuts that we have seen from this administration. I think Anson and I could probably go on all day about how unfair and unwarranted that is. But I think from the top, the first thing we need to do on any question about veterans is simply restore the VA at least to where it was before Inauguration Day 2025. With regard to mental health, it's so important. Veterans have very special mental health needs. Many of them have post-traumatic stress disorder, combat trauma, trauma associated with severe injuries or experiences that they had during war. The challenge is that not everyone is eligible for mental health services as a veteran. For example, National Guardsmen are not eligible for mental health. And you can imagine how many of those National Guards people who are currently being deployed against their neighbors across the country are going to need that. Another thing I learned this week, which I did not know and was sad to hear, is that if you have so-called bad paper in the military, if you are discharged less than honorably, you do not have access to mental health services. You're disabled from all services, but including mental health. I think that we need to explore for these people, many of whom may have been discharged with so-called bad paper because of trauma they experienced as a member of the military. We need to make sure that they at least get the mental health they need before they enter crisis and before they choose, perhaps, to end their lives. We need to spend more on the Veterans Administration, we need to spend more on our veterans, and just like we do with everyone, we need to remember that mental health is part of overall health. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Our next question is, many veterans face challenges transitioning into civilian life, from unemployment to lack of access to affordable housing. What role should the federal government play in ensuring veterans have strong pathways into good jobs, affordable housing, and education, and how would you prioritize those supports? Let's start with Doug, please.
Thanks, Senator. Again, I'll say what I said before, that we need to, at the very least, reverse the cuts that we have seen at the VA. We need to put people like Anson's wife, Rachel, back in their jobs. We need to restore the level of service that folks are used to. I want to talk about two areas of veteran assistance. The first, many veterans benefit from VA loans, but many of those veterans, because of the current economy or just life, get behind on their payments. And there was a federal program which gave those folks either forbearance or an opportunity to delay payments so that they didn't lose their home. That was somewhat controversial in Congress, and there are those in Congress, mostly Republicans, who believe that it should be structured differently. But unfortunately, in the meantime, that process has been suspended. So we have literally thousands of veterans in danger of losing their home because of what's happened to them and because of inaction in Washington. I also want to talk about the GI Bill. The GI Bill has provided educational benefits to veterans for decades. And there was a bill passed called the Forever GI Bill, which enabled folks to get 3 years of education if they were discharged after a certain date. The VA was applying a policy whereby someone who had served before then and served after then, by re-enlisting, was able to combine those benefits and get a 4th year of education. This administration has suspended that and is reading the requirements very strictly and denying veterans access to that 4th year of education. I think sending people around the world, expecting them to fight and die for their country and watch their fellow soldiers fight and die for their country is worth an additional year of education. And when I get to Congress, you can bet I will be pounding the table, waving my hands, and raising my voice to make sure that the people who serve us get served by us. Thank you.
Anson, please.
So the way I would prioritize these interests is I would say housing comes first, then education, and then good jobs. Without housing as a foundation, we cannot expect our veterans to have a good education or a good job. Housing is the basis. And you know, every time I hear about veterans who are unhoused, I ask, how does this happen? You know, in the VA system, there's a holistic view to health right now. That's the push. That's very impactful in getting people to the treatments that they need, the interventions that they need. And part of that should be assessing, are these veterans housed? So when they come in, every veteran should be assessed for whether or not they are housed. Now regarding education, veterans, when they complete their military service, they have military experience. What does that equate to for jobs? Well, as it turns out, they need extra education in order to qualify for their jobs. When I was getting my recertification as an emergency medical technician at the St. Cloud Technical and Community College, one of my classmates was a veteran, and he had served as a medic, but he still had to get certified in order to work as an emergency medical technician, which I think is appropriate, but there needs to be an appropriate funding for them. You know, serving as a medic in the military is different from serving as a paramedic on an ambulance. A lot of the skills cross over, but they need that specific training for the protocols that they'll be following. Let's see, also, in order to have good jobs, you know, a lot of our veterans come back missing limbs in addition to their internal injuries. And people have been addressing that through prosthetics, which is really great. That's enabled them to work in the fields. But they've also been working on limb transplants. And I think we need more research on limb regeneration. That's one thing I studied at St. Cloud Technical College. And that's a big promising field. And we need more research funds for it. Thank you.
Folks, this is our last question about veterans, but I have to acknowledge that it's one that's incredibly important to me because we in the state have been trying to make some real progress on this issue. I authored a couple bills on this one and worked really hard on it in the state last year. But we encountered partisan recalcitrance. Republicans refused to help us take care of disabled veterans. There are a couple different proposals about the issue we're just about to address that are currently being considered by Congress. Given the troubles we had at the state level, I'm myself very much hoping for some active leadership on this issue in Congress. And the question is, many veterans seeking benefits have fallen prey to claim sharks, unregulated companies that charge high fees, and unfortunately sometimes they actually do guarantee results when they can't. Often leaving the veterans worse off. How would you work to strengthen the protections, increase oversight, and ensure veterans get fair access to the benefits that they need? And this time I think we start with Anson.
So in regards to claim sharks, I think when veterans come into the VA system under the holistic health view, I think they should be interviewed to ask, what have you done to gain access to your benefits? Were you guided by someone who charged you fees? I mean, you shouldn't charge them anything to get those benefits. I understand, you know, there are people who are trying to provide a service, so they try to charge for the service they're providing so people can understand their benefits. But being predatory about it should not be legal. There should be a standard that says there's a difference between providing a service for a veteran to understand their benefits to just preying on them as they're trying to seek their benefits. And I think the holistic health gateway to the rest of their therapeutic care is a great way to spot that when they come in. That should be something they should ask. So that should be some of the oversight, should be legislation, as well as follow-up in the holistic health venue. And also, there should be internal counseling when they're in for their interviews for holistic health. They should be provided the service, the information they need to access those services. That shouldn't be something they have to dig for. Like Doug was saying, you know, they've gone to the front lines. They've put their lives on the line. And we should be helping them, bending over backwards, as much as they have been bending over backwards for us. Thank you.
Doug, please.
Thank you. I will freely admit that when we first got these questions, I did not know what a claim chart was, and I had never heard of them. And so I did what I will always do when I don't know something about an issue. I went and found someone who knows a lot about it. I was able to spend quite a bit of time with a Veterans Service officer this week talking about this and other issues. And what she explained to me is that there are a couple of different models for assisting veterans with their benefits. There's the public service model, people who work for the VA who have access to records and can assist with benefits. And then there are independent folks who can do the same. The important thing is that both of those groups of people have to be accredited to do that work. There's a process you go through, and in so doing, you then get access to people's file to make sure that they are getting the right benefits. Now, these claim sharks, who she says claim they're not claim sharks, but that's what claim sharks would say, are so-called advisors who then talk to people. It's like the difference between a broker and an advisor. A broker is like helping you directly, and an advisor is telling you what to do. These folks sell advisory services. And what happens, she told me, is that they look at someone, and based on how old they are, where they served, maybe their overall physical condition, they suggest a series of benefits that might not necessarily reflect the way in which they need service from the VA. The trick is that what they are doing is technically illegal, but there is no penalty for it. And so at the very least, after some hearings in Congress, I would recommend and would be very interested in figuring out how we can raise the bar on these advisement services and actually find a way to penalize them when they take advantage of veterans. Again, veterans, like any other constituent, sometimes need assistance navigating the federal government. We need to make sure that the people who are helping them are trusted friends and not just someone out to make a quick buck. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Folks, now we're going to switch to Medicare and Medicaid. And our first question around this issue is, Medicare has seen expanding use of privatized plans through Medicare Advantage, which has raised concerns about higher costs for patients and reduced benefits compared to traditional Medicare. How would you shape the future of Medicare? Should it remain a primarily public guarantee or continue moving toward more private insurance models? What reforms would you prioritize to strengthen the program for the long term? I think we start with Doug this time.
Thank you, Senator. I absolutely believe that Medicare needs to remain a public service program. It should not be private. I know that there is a pilot project underway that would allow some pre-authorization for some Medicare plans. I would not have supported such a pilot. I will not support expansion of such a pilot. I think anyone who isn't on Medicare, who's had to deal with pre-authorization from anything as simple as a blood test to something as important as a badly needed surgery, would say that we do not want to submit our Medicare patients to that. So I firmly believe that it should be a public project. I also firmly believe that we need to find a way not to cut costs, but to put more money into the Social Security and Medicare Trust Fund. And through that, I support what's called as scrapping the cap. I don't know if folks know this, but Medicare and Social Security are charged on a percentage basis against your income up to a certain amount, which I believe is currently $176,800 a year. And anybody who's made more than that will discover that their paycheck actually goes up at some point in the year because they stop paying Social Security and Medicare tax. And if you're wealthy enough, you pay it all in your first paycheck, while some people never pay it all in and yet still rely on that fund to go forward. I would support scrapping the cap entirely and making sure that wealthy people are funding Medicare and helping us all keep the promise that we made to them. We can look out for one another. We have the means to do so. So rather than focus on cutting costs, which is the MO of current private insurance companies, we need to find and make sure that that fund is robust and ready to go for all of us, not just folks who are going to retire soon, but folks who are going to retire forever in the United States of America. Thank you.
Anson?
All right, so Medicare can be very confusing. Even for me, as someone who's worked as a pharmacy technician in our local pharmacies here, it can be very confusing. You know, I remember times people came to the counter asking for their prescriptions and not understanding why their medication wasn't covered because they were in the donut hole, that sort of thing. So I do see an advantage of having some way of covering that shortfall in funding between, you know, both edges of the donut. So I think that's important. Medicare Advantage does provide a service in that regard. However, the wholesale privatization, I don't think is in the best interest of the people seeking Medicare services. And because of the confusion regarding Medicare, I think it's important for people to be able to have access for people in the Medicare system to explain everything exactly as it is for them. You know, there should be a budget cut for those people providing those services, providing that information. Citizens need to be able to access that. They shouldn't have to go through AI, phone chains, and all this in order to find it. It should be simple for them to access. Also, I think Medicare needs to be preserved into the future. I agree with Doug, we need to keep up with the funding, but I think the funding needs to come through having an actual budget, no more continuing resolutions like we're having now with our shutdown. We need appropriate taxation regarding that budget. If the wealthy can pay their fair share in taxes, not lower than the lowest tax brackets, then I think we can fund a budget that will maintain Medicare into the future. So, you know, for me, I think that should be a flat tax. I mean, as you make more money, you pay a little more, but it's not more than what you're making more. You know, it's a fair tax because it's a flat tax. Thank you.
Next question is for you, we're steps going back and forth. Our next question is similarly on Medicare and Medicaid. Medicaid's future has become a central political debate, with some pushing to restrict eligibility and impose new conditions, while others argue for expanding the program further. What direction do you believe Medicaid should take, and how would you work in Congress to ensure it remains both fiscally sustainable and accessible to those who need it most? We start with Anson.
So the people who need Medicaid services are the ones who can least likely afford the premiums. So I do think we need premium subsidies for people to access their Medicaid services. You know, when I was helping out at the pharmacy counter, and I would see someone come to the counter debating whether or not they can get their insulin prescription, you know, and then the Affordable Care Act came into place, and they were able to come back and get the prescription. You know, their life was on the line, and they shouldn't have to, you know, debate whether or not they're going to buy their prescriptions or pay for their rent. So I think we need to ensure that Medicaid is available. We need to be sure it's expanded, I think, as well, because there are many people who need that access. I think you know, we need to ensure that people who are needing Medicaid are not having to resort to emergency care. They need preventive care. They need to be able to get to medical services early, before there's a major issue, before they're losing circulation in a limb because they've not managed their diabetes correctly. You know, these are things that are life-changing for people, and we just need to ensure that the funding stays in place. And we should treat it as a human right. You know, even for...
Thanks, Anson. Doug?
Thank you. I think something that lots of Americans don't realize, I think often people think that Medicaid is only for people who are economically disadvantaged or lower income. I don't think a lot of people recognize that there are lots of people out there who get Medicaid because they are on disabilities or they are caring for someone with disabilities. And while everyone is hurt by Medicaid cuts, I think a lot of those families are the ones who are being hurt the most Many states offer what are so-called disability waivers that allow folks money to do what they need to do to care for their person with a disability. And when Medicaid disappears, a lot of that money disappears or is cut. Or those costs are passed off to the states, who then have to decide how they will cover those costs. So when we think about Medicaid, we need to think about, just like we do with Social Security and Medicare, how to treat it not like some fiscal program or some sort of aid, but as a promise that we have made to one another as Americans. And that we need to make sure that we're making Medicaid available not as some sort of backup, but as actually the source of health care for people who need it the most. All of these programs that require work requirements, the suggestion by the Agricultural Secretary that Medicaid patients could be a ready source of farm labor across the country, you laugh, but it's a dark laugh. It is absolutely outrageous to pick on the people who need care the most and expect more from them simply because of circumstances that are not in their control is unacceptable. I will fight to expand Medicaid as far as we possibly can and to ensure that the people who need it the most, especially people with disabilities and their caregivers, have what they need. Thank you.
Our next category of questions deal with immigration and human rights. We have three different sort of areas of human rights that we wanted to discuss. But I want to applaud Chantal and her friends at CD6 for articulating immigration and human rights, because it's about damn time that we realize the role of these things. The administration is conducting massive ICE raids that erode due process rights guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, while widespread reports from detention centers describe human rights abuses such as unsafe conditions, medical neglect, and family separation. If you were elected but did not have a legislative majority, how would you use your voice and platform to stand up against these abuses and defend the rights of immigrants? We'll start with Doug this time.
Thank you. I will briefly reject the premise of the question. I fully intend not only to win, but to be part of a majority. I'm tired of winning the argument and losing the election. We win the argument by winning the election, and that's what I intend to do. But if that doesn't happen, and I'm in a minority, I will do what any member of the minority worth their salt does. Use the weapons at your disposal. The weapon of oversight. You can pull in cabinet secretaries or other bureaucrats and question them about the funds they are spending. You can seek and require audits and accounting of the money that's being spent. You can visibly go to places where there is trouble. And yes, we have seen some members of Congress arrested and sometimes even charged for their role. I think as a public servant, it's my tax money too, and as a member of Congress, I have the right to see what is happening. And I will do whatever I can to make sure that I do. But finally, and here's where I betray my policy geek cred, there are an infinite number of weapons under that little-known revolutionary document, Robert's Rules of Order, that you can use. You can propose amendments. You can block consideration of certain bills. You can tie riders to bills in committee. You can use consent or advance notice. The House rules have all kinds of traps for the unwary. And as someone who has worked in the field for years, I intend, especially in the minority, if that's the case, to find every possible way to spring those traps. What's happening to our immigrants in this country is unconscionable. I may not be able to swing a hammer, but by God, I will swing a rule book. Thank you.
Anson, please.
I think advocating for human rights is very important. Because I think the rights that we have as American citizens, basically, for the majority, they are human rights. And if we deny those rights to certain populations, we might as well be denying the rights to everybody. Regarding being in the minority in legislation, you know, I, like Doug, would like to be in the majority, but if I would happen to be in the minority, I think it's important for us to break down partisanship in legislation. We do that by building relationships. And the reason why it's so important right now is I was listening to an interview with Arnie Carlson this last week, and he's talking about the dangerous precipice that we're on as a nation right now. If things go wrong, we could end up in a civil war condition, and we don't want that to happen. I mean, my family, I had a member, an ancestor who fought in the Civil War. He lost 2 fingers. He had to go back home with the body of one of his loved ones on the back of his horse. We don't want that here in America, this land of promise. And we need to reignite an interest in national unity over political unity, political partisanship. The way I'm going to phrase that is we need to get back to the basics of what it means to have liberty and justice for all. We need to go back to our founding documents. I may not be an expert on the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, but when I read through that Declaration of Independence that I have posted out in the hallway right now, it inspires me deeply about what our foundational freedoms are and should be. And I think people on both sides of the aisle, if they're faced in a conversation with what those rights are, they should endorse that. Also, I want to give voice to the people whose liberties have been abused. I think those examples will speak thousands of words. Thank you.
Our next question in this category is federal protections for abortion have been overturned, and there are growing efforts to restrict contraception and other forms of reproductive health care. How would you work to safeguard reproductive rights and ensure access to a full range of care? And we start with Anson.
The abortion issue has been a hot-button issue ever since I have been in high school. And I have spent a lot of my life just trying to decide where I want to come down on that. On one point, I have a conservative, religious background, but at the same time, in my medical experience, I know that there are medically necessary abortions that have to happen. And so I've wrestled with this internally quite a bit. I think we do need a national standard. If it's state by state, I think there's no one standard for people to understand how to abide by. And I guess getting back a little bit, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So on one side, people say, well, it's a women's rights issue. On the other side, they say it's a constitutional issue because life begins at conception. I think we need a dialogue to acknowledge everyone's valid concerns over this issue. And we need to say, this is where we're going to draw the line. I know that with Roe v. Wade, there was an attempt to do that. I think we need to get back to that and reestablish where that line actually is. When doctors are providing care, they need that common standard nationally to know that they're not going to be put in jail for providing obstetric care. I think it's just horrendous for doctors to be wondering, am I going to go to jail for what I'm doing? Also, patients should not be left to bleed out because they can't access care, because it might be illegal. Additionally, I think we need to support people who might seek an abortion for economic reasons. We need to give them financial support. We need to give them educational support. We need to give them child care support so they don't have to resort to abortions just for those reasons. Thank you.
Okay, this one's important enough that I'm going to stand up. Let me be really clear right from the jump. Reproductive health care is health care, and I support full reproductive rights. On the big picture, we need to get Roe v. Wade back to be the law of the land, whether that's codifying it or finding a way to get the Supreme Court, whether it's getting new justices on the Supreme Court or more justices on the Supreme Court. I think we need to put the court back into the reproductive health question. little more inside baseball though. Many of you are probably familiar with something called the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits federal funding for abortions. That has always been controversial. It's constantly renewed. But one of the things that we've noticed in recent years is that pro-birth advocates are pushing to use the Hyde Amendment to restrict health care in other ways. In fact, just recently, a group of pro-birth advocates, anti-abortion folks, were claiming that the Hyde Amendment prohibited the extension of the health care premium subsidies because that money might be used for reproductive health care. So we'll try and fix the big picture in the court and get Roe v. Wade back to be the law of the land. But in the meantime, whether it's access to abortion, whether it's access to fertility care, whether it's access to something like the Plan B pill, we will fight so that it is women and their doctors, not members of Congress, old white men like me, who are making a decision about reproductive health care.
Our next question in this category, our last question in this category is, attacks on LGBTQ plus rights are escalating. From efforts to ban gender-affirming care to fears that Obergefell v. Hodges could be overturned. How would you defend the dignity and equality of LGBTQ plus Americans, particularly transgender people, in the face of these challenges? Doug, please.
I'm still a little fired up, so I'm gonna keep standing if you don't mind. I tell people all the time, this issue is very important to me. I am not just in favor of same-sex marriage. I've actually helped to pay for one. My daughter and her wife just celebrated their first anniversary and live in San Francisco. So, and mind you, it doesn't have to happen to you to matter to you. It mattered to me already, but I feel it particularly strongly. And so my answer to just about all of these issues across the country is, why do we care? Why do we care how people want to live, how they see themselves, what they want their bodies to be? Why do we care? Why, instead of focusing on taxes and education and healthcare, are we so obsessed with children's genitals? I mean, isn't children's genitals for guys in the trouble with the Epstein files in the first place? If you don't want to do something because of your religion, I respect that. If you don't want me to do something because of my religion, why do you care? Go away. I will stand. We should mind our own business. Let people live their lives. Let them be who they are. Let them love who they love. And as a member of Congress, I will fiercely defend the entire alphabet of LGBTQIA+ in Congress to make sure that people can be who they are, love who they love, and live the lives they want to lead like any other American. Thank you.
Anson.
All right, well, for getting back to basics, I mean, there's the basic of, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, I may be a white, straight guy, but why should I dominate what other people want to do in their pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness? I may not personally prescribe to a homosexual lifestyle or a queer lifestyle, but I have family members who are transgender, or gay, and I'm not going to disown them because they are. I still need to love them for who they are. I've worked in many professions with people who are on this LGBTQ spectrum, and they're just there to do a job and live their lives, and we need to defend their rights. Even if I may not prescribe to the same lifestyle, I am willing to stand up for their right to live their lifestyle. I have not stood in their shoes. I don't know how they've developed their identity, and it's important for all of us to respect that, and law needs to respect that. Now, I know one focus on the conservative side has been trying to ban transgender athletes. They claim that they're, starting out, particularly transgender girls. They claim that because they started out as boys, as their gender identity at birth, that they have an unfair advantage because they've had testosterone in their system. They need a fair place to participate in sports. They need a fair place that aligns with their identity. I am in favor of transgender girls participating as girls. Now, if there's some other scientific consideration that needs to be taken into account to allow for fair advantage or unfair, I guess fair participation, I guess I'd be willing to consider that. But as of now, I think transgender girls should be in transgender sports, or girl sports. Thank you.
All right, so our next category is small business. Now, many in Minnesota view business owners as greedy or exploitative, but at the same time, sometimes we make policies for big business and small business gets kind of stuck in the middle. So how would you encourage a business environment that rewards treating employees well and supports entrepreneurship while balancing accountability and flexibility? And I think it's time to start with Anson, please.
The dynamics of small businesses starting out versus big box stores, it's different. Being a small business, you can't afford some of the outlay that you may as a big box store. If you're trying to cover healthcare benefits for your employees, I think there need to be subsidies for that healthcare coverage and other benefits. I do appreciate the existence of the Small Business Administration that helps people like entrepreneurs get started in their business. But I think there need to be allowances for those small businesses until they get to a certain level, so they can be self-sustaining. For example, OSHA. OSHA should come in and look at the workplace. If there are violations, they shouldn't necessarily be punitive. They should be guiding. But there should also be allowances. If the small business can't get the exact T of what a big box store might be able to do, perhaps there is a middle of the road way they can give the same amount of protection for them to meet those OSHA requirements. It's similar to the IRS or the FAA having more of a guiding role rather than a punitive role. I think that's important. So that's the general philosophy I have. Being more specific, I guess I'd have to wait until later to give you more specifics, but thank you very much.
Go, please.
Let me try and give you some more specifics now. Typically, the way we deal with small businesses in policy is to make allowances for them, to exempt them from certain laws, or to give them allowance on certain regulations. I think somehow that misunderstands the needs that small businesses have. I've talked to many small business owners in my travels around the district over the last several months. Does anyone want to guess what their number one concern is? It's healthcare, actually. I've talked to people who are worried about how they are going to cover the cost of employer-sponsored healthcare for their employees. Even with the new paid leave law here in Minnesota, I talked to a couple of small business owners who want to do the right thing, but are getting buried by their providers in terms of making that funding available. So I think what we need to do is we need to assist small businesses with the foundation. We need to fix the healthcare system, either by providing healthcare or making it way more affordable, not just for individual families, but for small businesses, including farms, which are small businesses. We need to make sure that their markets are good, that they are not suffering. Tariffs are bad for everybody, but they're particularly bad for a small business. I met a vendor at a community fair in Northwood, Young America, who had been selling goods for something like 2 decades. And 2 or 3 of his most expensive goods were about to double in price. And so rather than stop selling those, he was just going to quit the business entirely. So while we still need to look out for small businesses, whether it's with loans or incentive programs, I would like to see us focus on assisting them with the fundamentals, like good markets and healthcare, and not focus so much on giving them a pass on the things that we want all businesses, not just small businesses, to do. Thank you.
Folks, we have one last category and one last question, so I'm hoping that you all have brilliant ideas and curiosities that you'd like to share with the rest of us and with our candidates, and that we can get some questions from you guys coming up pretty soon too. So please consider doing that if you would. And again, our last question category and question is about global affairs. Palestinians have faced ongoing displacement, human rights violations, and what many international observers recognize as acts of genocide. I'm going to editorialize a little bit and tweak this question a bit and begin it with, do you agree with that categorization, and would you use the word genocide? And secondly, how would you use your role in Congress to promote accountability, protect human rights, and support a just and lasting peace in the region? We start with Doug.
Thank you. The answer to your question is yes. It looks, if it walks like a genocide, it talks like a genocide, I think it is a genocide. That said, and you'll hear this from me constantly when I'm your member of Congress, I think two things can be true. I think you can believe that the state of Israel has a right to exist, given the horrors of the Second World War. But I think you can also agree that we need a Palestinian state where the people of Palestine can live in peace and have their own government and not be forced to be subject. Obviously, the latest peace plan is good news. As always, you worry about the reaction of the parties, particularly the Netanyahu government. They're already saying that there's some high-value prisoners they are not prepared to release. I think as a member of Congress, we need to use whatever levers we have at our disposal, whether it's conditions on aid, whether it's international pressure, what have you, to make sure that both parties, but let's be honest right now, Israel is doing what it needs to do, not just to seek peace in the region, but actually create the conditions where it can happen. People dying is never good, and what happened on October 7th, 2023 is awful, but the ongoing carnage in the region, including literally killing innocents and children in line for food, is something we cannot allow to continue. I pray for peace in the region like anybody else, but if we have to get tough with our longtime friends, including the state of Israel, I have no problem with that.
Anson, please.
Last year, I was able to attend the DNC in Chicago for the first time, and I was very honored to be there as an alternate delegate. The first night during the DNC, the protests broke through the barriers, and Secret Service would not let us proceed. We had to sit on the bus for 4 hours while that protest was taking place, and some of us never made it into the arena that night. I think the voices that were trying to speak, the reason why they broke down those barriers, they needed to be heard. During the DNC, there was an Israeli family who got up and spoke regarding their son who was being held hostage. And I appreciated their perspective. Unfortunately, he did die soon after. But where was the Palestinian voice in the DNC? They should have been on that floor. They should have been heard. Instead, they were ostracized to the outside of the arena. People could only go speak with them after the events were done. Ilhan Omar took the time to sit down with them. She bought pizza for them, and she spoke with them. They should have had a place for their voice at the DNC. I'd like to speak for a second on apartheid. When I was in college, I went to a national student conference in Louisville, Kentucky, and we had people from South Africa speaking about the apartheid they were experiencing then. I'm so glad that they have broken through. When I was researching President Carter's history, I saw a documentary on his views on the Middle East, and he said, Gaza is living in an apartheid society. It surprised me to hear that, but it was eye-opening for me, and it was true. They are second-class citizens, and they need to live with equal rights. Regarding a single-state or two-state solution, I think a two-state solution is only going to increase segregation. I think they need to live under a single state where everybody has rights. Thank you.
Folks, we are now done with the prepared questions, and so now we have the questions that came from you. And we have a number of them, some of them on similar themes, so I'm likely to paraphrase. So if you don't hear your words, I apologize, but we're still going to get to the issue that you'd like us to address. The rules are the same, you guys still have 2 minutes, but you weren't prepped for these, so if you end up going for 15 seconds, I suppose that's okay, but we're still going to do 2. And as long as we're talking about global affairs, we have a question. What will you do about Ukraine? How will you advocate for Ukrainians in Congress? I think this time we start with Anson.
When the conflict in Ukraine started, it was actually when President Obama was in office. We should have taken a stronger stance then to prevent Russian incursion into Ukraine. Then they stopped after they got the peninsula. And then they started again, and we knew they were going to be coming for the rest of Ukraine. We should have stopped that incursion from happening. I mean, I really appreciated Joe Biden as president. It was surely nice to hear him enter office and complete a full sentence without having to circular speak all over and over and over. But this is one area where I disagreed with him. We should have been more forceful. And I expressed my views to my senators and other people who would listen. And we needed to stand up for them. I think we need to stand up for them now. I think we need boots on the ground. It is outrageous to me that Russia can come into Ukraine and not face oppositional forces. We need, ideally, allied forces in Ukraine, not initially as offensive forces, but as protective forces. If Russian forces would fire on those forces, I would expect them to retaliate. Now, I know Russia is threatening nuclear war, if that sort of thing were to happen, but this is a similar situation to the Cuban crisis back in the 60s. We need to have the courage to stand up, otherwise this cancer is going to continue to fester and become a threat to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Fun fact to know and tell, I minored in Russian studies in college and had an opportunity to study the history of Russia and the Soviet Union. Russia has been overrun several times by the Mongols and others, and as a result is very protective of the homeland. The Russian word is Rodina. And so they were always concerned, even the Soviet Union, all of the republics around the outside, the stands, as my friends used to call them, were like a protective wall. It's important to understand that Russians view that territory as theirs, either because it belongs to them or because they need a buffer against the rest of the world. The problem is that if you move the border, do you then need a further buffer to go out? We can work with Russia. Russia is not and never will be our friend. We need to stand up for the people of Ukraine. Now, I respectfully disagree. I don't know that we want to put our troops on the ground. That would basically be invoking NATO, and that would literally be putting us in the position of a shooting war. But I think we can do what FDR did with England in the run-up before the Second World War and be very aggressive with providing aid to the people of Ukraine, to give them the armaments, the economic support, everything they need, not just to slow the Russian invasion, but to actually drive them back to the borders of Russia. Any negotiated solution should result in the release of all Ukrainian territory, including the Crimean Peninsula. We should allow the people of Ukraine to be the people of Ukraine and not live in the shadow of an authoritarian like Mr. Putin, who wants to reestablish the czarist world of the old Russian Empire. Slava Ukraini.
Let's do one more question, audience question on global affairs. What's your opinion of the Trump administration bombing Iran earlier this year? Let's start with Doug.
You always are concerned about a regime like Iran getting nuclear weapons, but I feel like what the Trump administration did was done more for the spectacle of it than for the actual impact on Iran's nuclear plans. And let's remember that this president has been all over the map on Iran. We're bombing a country that we were originally, under his leadership, allowing to do many of the things that his predecessor, President Obama, had tried to stop them from doing. I am with anyone who believes that we need to make sure that rogue nations like Iran don't get nuclear weapons, but I think we need to do that through diplomacy and treaties and creative intelligence and not merely bombing facilities, especially given that these so-called bunker busters busted only themselves and not any bunkers.
When it comes to international policies, I am at heart a pacifist. But when people are being slaughtered, like they were in World War II, and like they are now in Ukraine, I think people need to stand up. You know, the Ukrainians have been butchered for far too long. They need physical support there. Looking at Iran, I do think that bombing Iran was the wrong thing to do. I think there are a lot of other things we could have done before that. You know, bombs are the only tool in your toolbox. Bombs are going to come in right back at you. We know that Iran is funding a lot of mischief in the Middle East. We need to be openly engaged with them in dialogue in order to have them stop that intervention in the Middle East. But they need to be above board. We need to, see how can we establish trust with Iran. Without that, there won't be any peace. You can never have peace just by bombing people. But again, I want to be a pacifist, but as like Albert Einstein changed his views as a pacifist during World War II to understanding that there are times when force is needed to stop slaughter. But with Iran, it was a different scenario. There was time yet to get them to change their mind. There used to be policies where they exchanged sports teams and things. I think we need that social engagement between Iran. There's a lot of other stuff. We just need to be creative and give it a try. And getting them on board with us and gaining their trust would go a long way to promoting peace in the rest of the world. Thank you.
So folks, we have a question here. Well, I'll just say it. Epstein. I think that issue, that concern raises a lot of different issues. The first, which isn't a question, but I think it's important, and something I asked you to talk about a little bit, is how do you feel about transparency in government and access to private information, those kinds of things? And secondly, given that particular individual, do you have any ideas, or what are your ideas, frankly, for dealing with trafficking, human trafficking, at the federal level? So that's sort of a convoluted question in two parts. One, how do you feel about transparency and openness in government? And secondly, what are your plans to deal with human trafficking? I think we start with Anson.
You said it so fast. I wasn't sure I heard you straight. You said Epstein?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Oh my goodness. From what I've heard, of course, I've only heard what's in popular media regarding Epstein. I have some questions. Did somebody who was in power arrange for his suicide in prison? I don't know. I think maybe there's room for investigation there yet. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but I don't really know all of the facts. When it comes to human trafficking in general, as a flight attendant, we have been trained to try to spot human trafficking and to give people help if needed. And there are times when we've had to raise the alarm. And it's been proven that in our local airport, people are going through that every day who are being trafficked for slave labor or sex work, you name it. So it's important to defend people who are being trafficked. Regarding Epstein in particular, I think there needs to be transparency. I think there are a lot of people who are sweating because there are people in power who thought that their names would never come to light. So I'm really concerned that our Department of Justice is trying to keep that file on the down low. I think we do need transparency. We need that one more signature. We need that other, who is it that needs to be in Congress who's willing to sign? I guess
delete degree all of
Yeah, okay, so once she's able to come into office, I think we may have that one signature, we may be able to force those files to come to light. It needs to happen, there needs to be transparency. And people in power need to be held accountable. No one should be above the law, even the president.
Thank you. Yeah,
I've worked in democracy and elections my whole life, and I believe very strongly in the idea of transparency in government. Now, I understand that there are certain things, whether it's sensitive personal information or sometimes critical intelligence that needs to be kept closer hold. But when it comes to the activities of our elected officials, whether it's what stocks they trade, what assets they hold, what they may have done under the cover of dark, I think that's something that we as people and I as a member of Congress believe I should have access to. I think that we need a transparent government. I think one way, coming back to my Russian, there's a saying in Russian, right? Trust but verify. We can trust our officials, but we can also verify that they are doing what they are supposed to be doing. When it comes to human trafficking, it's difficult because it usually is such a, even though it happens on a large scale, usually the people being trafficked are on a much smaller scale. I think obviously we need to continue to investigate and try and break trafficking rings around the world. But I think just like with the Epstein files, we need to come down hard on people who are using those trafficked persons, whether it's for slave labor or sex work or something else. We need to view human trafficking with the same urgency that we view people who have been driven from their homes by war or famine or other calamity. We need to look out for trafficked people who, let's be honest, are usually women, to make sure that they are kept safe and they can live the life they want to lead and not be used for somebody else's purposes. So if something else, if something is going on like the Epstein files, we need to swear in, I don't need to agree on, we need to release the Epstein files. We need to be transparent both about our workings of government and what we're doing to combat human trafficking around the world.
So I think we're going to do two more audience questions, and both of them kind of pivot around questions of political practices and processes themselves. And the first is, do you support Democrats holding out on funding the government until the ACA tax subsidies are renewed? And if so, why? So,
Yes. And that goes back to my answer about Robert's Rules of Order. Right now, Democrats are in the minority in Congress. They do not hold the White House. But the way our government works right now is that you need 60 votes in the Senate to get anything done on this bill. And the price of those votes in the Senate is going to be extending the healthcare premium subsidies and, hopefully, some progress on rolling back the Medicare cuts. So yes, I do support that. We do whatever we can. For all the talk that our friend, maybe not our friend, Mr. Emmer, is about how the House has sent the Senate a clean CR and how dare Senate Democrats refuse to vote for it. I don't know if anybody else here as a kid participated in the practice known as a ring and run, where you would ring somebody's doorbell and run away. What the House did to the Senate is literally a ring and run. They sent them something they knew could not pass and literally ran. For those of you not keeping score, the House is now not coming back until Monday, October 20th. And Mr. Emmer has been using his time off not to meet with people in the district, not to do something about the problems that face us, but to yell at Senate Democrats on Facebook. If he wants to yell at Senate Democrats, then he should try to go run for the Senate. I'm with Senate Democrats. I'm a hell no until those subsidies are extended. Thank you.
Anson?
I took a moment to look at Representative Emmer's YouTube page to see what he was saying recently. And of course, he, like all of the rest of the Republicans, was blaming this government shutdown on Democrats, saying, you've voted for continuing resolutions multiple times before, why don't you do it now? This is a clean resolution. Well, the situation is different now. These subsidies going away, they're affecting people's lives. And this is a different situation now than it was before. And I do support the Democrats standing up for getting these rights reinstated, or the subsidies reinstated. You know, and I think it is disingenuous of Representative Emmer to say these things that he's saying. I think it's a sign of how much he's compartmentalized his thinking so that he can toe the line for the MAGA movement. And you know, and I think for him as an attorney, I think he's practiced in a life where he can compartmentalize his feelings. But I think it has compromised his values and what he sees as true. I think it has blinded him to what is true and authentic. And that is one reason why I want to run against Tom Emmer. Thank you.
We did just get one more new question, but before I do that, I have a follow-up, but just for Anson. Ring and run or doorbell ditch? What do you call it when you ring a doorbell and you run away? Do you have preferred?
I think the ring and run is, yeah. Sorry.
We are in vehement agreement here.
I never heard that before. We called the doorbell ditch where I grew up. How about you guys?
Yeah.
I'm glad we've got to these important issues. So the new question we got, it's been 39 years since the last immigration reform. There are many jobs that require immigrant labor, and they are working and paying their taxes. We should actually all just say that really loud, that they are working and paying their taxes. If you win the election, are you going to take the lead so that undocumented families can emerge from the shadows and have their rights respected? I'm going to tweak that a little bit. How will you take the lead to ensure that our undocumented families can emerge from the shadows and have their rights respected? I think we're starting with Anson, right?
Yeah, so immigration has been broken for a very long time. And I certainly do appreciate a lot of the immigrant workers who work very hard in our nation for very low-paying jobs for the most part. I really appreciate seeing those who finally get to advance and pursue the American dream. But it takes a long time if you're starting out from square zero. I've worked as, well, I worked for a while as a detasseling supervisor in the fields. And so I did work with some immigrant communities in those cornfields. And they do work very hard under very trying circumstances. So how would we fix things for them? I think that you know, getting people, children who come as children with their parents to America, you know, giving them pathways to citizenship, I think is important. Also, we don't have sufficient justices to hear all of the cases in the backlog of immigration cases. Also, I would speak up for respecting people's dignity when they're in the immigration process. I think what's happening with ICE right now is just so antithetical as to what we are supposed to be as Americans. Like I'm saying, we need to get back to the basics of liberty and justice for all, not just those who look and talk like you. I think what else would we do? Yeah, there needs to be a clear path. I guess, you know, the Republicans have broken the online system that was used for people to sign up for their hearings. They said you have to go back to Mexico in order to wait before your hearing. I think we also need to be proactive in addressing what the problems are that are pushing people to our country. If there's gang violence in a country that's causing people to fear for their lives, we should converse with those countries to get them to address those problems. Thank you.
Would I take the lead? Yes. Hell yes, I would take the lead. I don't think people understand how badly broken and how difficult the process is of becoming a citizen in this country. Yeah. There's so many people out there who talk about, you know, undocumented immigrants, or that awful phrase that I despise, illegal alien, as if the idea is that you come across the border, you go to the DMV, and all you have to do is get a card, and then you're a citizen, and then you can have access to healthcare and paying jobs and what have you. It's not that simple. I know of people who either through marriage or through just coming here and working have taken literally decades to get their citizenship, have done everything right, have gone to every appointment, have filled out every form, have paid every fee. It shouldn't take 20 years to become a citizen in this country. And we shouldn't be carrying off people in paddy wagons because they haven't had the opportunity to navigate that. Immigration is very important to me. My family and I actually sponsor 3 scholarships for Dreamers to help them go to college. I think we need to make sure that DACA is extended. I think we need to make sure that those fees don't go up. We need to give families who have come here an opportunity not just to become American citizens, but to be productive, honest, above board citizens of this country, paying taxes as Americans and not paying taxes to someone who's in threat of being taken away. This country was built by immigrants. And in fact, if you are not indigenous, you're an immigrant in this country. We need to make America, we need to make becoming an American as great as it is to be an American. And I will fight like hell in Congress to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Our last question before closing statements is, from some perspectives, perhaps the most important one. How are you going to win? How are we going to win? What's your plan to win? Doug?
You're stealing my closing statement a little bit, but let's talk. I talked about how the 6th is growing. People look at the 6th district and think that it's a safe Republican district, and if you look at the election returns, you would think that was true. But here's a couple other things that are true. First of all, Tom Emmer has never, ever faced a serious challenge in this district. No Democrat who's ever run against Tom Emmer for Congress has ever raised more than $220,000 for the entire cycle. I intend to shatter that. The district is changing. It's not just a rural district anymore. I've already mentioned all of those housing developments down near the Twin Cities. That's creating a new pocket of people that our research suggests are significantly more Democratic than the rest of the district. We have an opportunity to fire up Democrats who may have stayed home last time, to identify new Democrats who will join us, and to persuade Republicans and independents who maybe, probably are, suffering voters' remorse after casting their ballot for this president in the 2024 election. Am I promising I'll win? No. But I'm not doing this for fun. I'm too old to be doing this to make a name. I'm in this to win. I'm going to win this time, and I'm going to win next time, and we're going to turn this district blue. We'll need your help. I will need your money. I'm going to say it again. I will need your money. We won't outspend Tom Emmer, but we will out-organize him. We will outwork him. It's not very difficult. We will outsmart him. And I look forward to having you all at my party in November of 2026 when I walk out and tell you that we just got that concession call.
Anson?
Whether it's me or if it's Doug, what matters is that Tom Emmer loses. For me, I appreciate all of Doug's experience. I think it qualifies him very highly for this position. Me, I am a different individual. I have strengths just like Doug has strengths. I have weaknesses just like Doug has weaknesses. But I'm used to working as part of a team. And where I have weaknesses, I believe I can put together a cabinet who will help me address those weaknesses. I think one of my strengths is being able to listen to people. Now that I'm closing up my exploratory phase of my candidacy and I'm preparing to officially declare, I'm going to get out. I'm going to meet with every single SD in this district. And I'm going to meet with people who are not just Democrats. My background, I grew up on a small dairy farm. And we live on an agricultural homestead now. I think that gives me some inroads to communicate with some of the people in my own red precinct in Minden Township. And I expect to meet with my neighbors. I expect to go to meet people who are not my neighbors. I've made it a goal of mine to serve the people in my community, and no matter what occupation I have been in. And that includes serving the people who come from Somalia, the people who come from Mexico, the people who come from any nation around this world. It means serving the people of any sexual orientation, just any religion. You don't have to be, someone like myself. I want to make those connections. It's important to listen because my understanding is not enough to understand all of the issues. Just today, I was listening to an educator about her experience in education, and she was expanding my view about what can be done from the federal level for education. I expect to continue that work through the entire campaign, and it will be my honor to serve you if I can. Thank you.
We still have space for closing statements, and we still have closing we'd like to do.
Yes, yes.
We've got 1 minute to close it up, if you would, please.
Oh, I'm good at something. Yeah, yes.
All right, related to listening, people may not hang around after this event. If you want to speak with me afterward, I will hang out for a while. I'm willing to allow you to bend my ear. I want to listen to you. I want to hear you. If I do not hear your feedback, I won't be able to take your knowledge and your experiences with me. So please take your time to give me your feedback. Even if you don't like something I've said today, I would like to hear your feedback. If you like what I said, great. Let me know that as well. But for those who want to go somewhere else to continue a conversation, I am planning to go to Perkins for lunch. So that'll be the Perkins over by the Sartell Clinic, close to the Central Care Plaza. If you need that specific address, I can give it to you before we all leave. I do not have enough money to buy your lunch, but they have promised that they will try to give me some room in the back room there. So please take some time to meet with me. It has been my pleasure to serve as a children's ministry coordinator, nature attendant, substitute teacher, pharmacy technician, trauma center employee, and flight attendant. And please let me serve you going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Anson. While we're touting our after parties, we'll be meeting at Jules Bistro on West St. Germain downtown, starting at 1 o'clock. Please do come, and I'd be happy to answer your questions in longer than 2-minute bursts. I'm glad to see you there. After the Battle of El Alamein, the great Nazi defeat, Winston Churchill was asked, "Is this the end of the war?" And Churchill said, "It is not the end, and it's perhaps not the beginning of the end, but it is the end of the beginning." I believe we've reached the end of the beginning of this campaign, my friends. We've reached the point where we know who we want to go forward, where we need to stop deciding who will represent us and start the work of going forward. I have raised over $60,000 in the first quarter. I have traveled all over the district. I am ready to begin the work of organizing, not just to make a good showing, but to beat Tom Emmer in 2026. I believe the time is now. I'm ready to ask for your support. I'm ready to gain your support. 388 days until Election Day, ladies and gentlemen. Let's make every single one count. My name's Doug Chapin. Thank you.
Folks, it should be clear from the last hour and a half that either of these gentlemen would be vastly superior to Tom Emmer. But still with a ham sandwich. Because you can get your hands on a ham sandwich. It's real. You can find one somewhere. Probably smarter too, but that's a different issue.
Not everybody eats ham.
Not everybody eats ham. The question we are faced with right now is, what are you going to do to help one of these two people win? That's the question you all have to ask yourself. And I want you to think about this too. Emmer is our local Trumpiness.
Yes.
A local manifestation of the ideology of Trumpism. Not Trump himself, but of the ideas of Trumpism.
Yeah.
At least today he is. We'll see about tomorrow. But right now, that's what he is. The work that you do for either of these two gentlemen, once they are our endorsed candidate, is historic. You'll be able to tell your kids and your grandkids and other people that you helped defeat Trumpism every door you knock for either of these people. It's going to be hard, but hard things are good. And there are consequences to righteous, industrious labor. Maybe one of them wins, maybe they don't. But the act of working for better, the act of standing up for a more just world is something no one can ever take away from you. So I implore you to stand up and get involved in this election. And I ask you to thank our friends for trying. Great day today.